Trauma is a big buzzword now where people are asking like, oh my God, do I have trauma? And the real answer is it's how do you feel? What's your life experience? Do you find yourself becoming dysregulated and triggered in situations that are relatively safe and non-threatening? And if the answer is yes, then there's something to explore into. And then you can go into those responses and start learning about yourself and see why they're there.
Welcome to the Cosmic Love Antenna Podcast. This podcast is meant to encourage you to connect within so you can share your light with the world. And now, here's your host, Harrison Ma.
Welcome, beautiful beings, beautiful souls tuning in. This is the Cosmic Love Antenna, your weekly installment of your inner inspection to help with your outer reflection. Today is another episode deep dive into all things love, here with your host Harrison and a beautiful guest who I'm going to introduce in 2 seconds to help you pull back the layers restricting health, alignment, and love. And the beautiful being, powerful masculine energy, and the man I have on the show today to interview, to go back and forth with and help share some wisdom with all of you beautiful people listening, is Mr. Dan Kraft. He is a holistic pain expert, fitness and rehab specialist. And just to be honest, he is a very powerful and loving man. If you are tuning into this episode, what you're going to get today is a deep dive into all things physical rehabilitation, chronic pain release, physical to energetic connection, and a whole lot more. Mr. Dan, my friend, welcome to the Cosmic Love Antenna.
Yes, thank you. And great to be here. Appreciate you having me.
It's a pleasure, my friend. It's a long time coming, to be honest. We've shared a lot of spaces together. We've done a bit of work together, and this is the first time I'm getting to connect to your beautiful face. So I love these podcasts as at least an excuse to do that. So I love you, my friend, and I'm grateful that you've come on. So where I want to start, Dan, is where I usually start these chats. Is I know you, I know your story, I know the mission that you're doing in the world, but the people listening do not. So I want to start with a maybe quick little summary, quick little story of, I call it the main pain teacher that has led you into the work that you're doing in the world. And you, my friend, have a good pain teacher story that I think a lot of people need to hear about. So I would love to hear, just a brief summary of the story, Dan, of around your neck. And what I'll do is I'll jump in and ask questions, and then we'll flow from there.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. So I'm a holistic pain practitioner, and so I help people get out of chronic pain. Most times people who have gone through the mainstream circuit, have gone through the medical system, and have not gained results. And the way I became so passionate about it was I had my own story. And so something about me is growing up, I always had extreme social anxiety. I struggled to conversate with people. When I was 18, it was so extreme that I struggled to hold conversations. And so that pain, that suffering was a huge part of what drove me into self-development. And early on, I developed a passion for fitness. When I was 11 years old, I started working out and being antisocial. While everyone else was going to parties, I became really obsessed with the body. And so in high school, I literally had a book on the muscles, the anatomy, and I was studying the book and learning about sarcomeres and type 1 and type 2 fibers. And so I really got an early start and really got really passionate, really excited about the body. And
Dan, let me jump in there. I listened to your story, and I haven't heard you actually express this part before, so it's nice to hear it. My story is very similar, and I'm wondering, I want to dive into the specific piece of being attracted to the physical. What do you think it was that made you so interested in the physicality? So like, for example, I know for me, it was so approachable, right? Once you started to understand it, you could, 1 plus 1 plus 2 equals 3 with the physical body, and it became sort of empowering. What pulled you, what made it click in your head from the physicality perspective?
I think it is part of it is that when you do something with your body, you can really feel it. And so just the fact that I could feel it, because I remember the first day I started working out, and I was worried about getting bullied in middle school because we have a program called the DARE program. and drug abuse resistance education. So he started talking about bullies, and that scared the crap out of me. And I'm like, well, I don't want to be bullied. I want people to take my lunch money. And so it was like the summer, like before middle school, I'm like, what am I going to do about this? And then I see some dumbbells just like sitting on the living room floor. I'm like, okay, like what if I start working out and I bulk up, they'll be scared to pick on me. And so I picked up the dumbbells and started doing arm curls. I just remember feeling the sensation of like, man, this feels so good. And so did a bunch of those. And remember the next day I felt the soreness, and I just loved that feeling. And so it started from just the feeling and just enjoying that feeling. I'm very kinesthetic. I'm very felt. And so that was really where it started. And just that feeling, just how good it felt, led to that passion of just getting excited about working out. And
it almost ignited something inside of you that was there the whole time, my friend. It sounds like it ignited I'm a big fan of the quote. I think it's Socrates. Maybe people can correct me in the comments, but it's a famous Greek perspective regardless. And the quote is, it is every man's duty, and you could insert woman here too, every man/woman's duty to embody what their potential is. I'm butchering it here, but to see the expression of what their physicality is. And I think that's what I'm hearing in your story, my friend. I want to fast forward here a bit, Dan, to your surfing incident. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. And so from 12 years old, I decided I want to be a personal trainer. And so I went to school for it. And then I became a personal trainer, went to college, got my dream job at a gym called Equinox, a very upscale gym, luxury gym, a very highly touted. People in the US know very, very well. And so I got my dream job. And at that time, I'd mostly overcome a lot of my social anxiety and my social issues. And so I was training at that gym, rising up really fast. And just from the passion and just everything, like I was just rising up like a rocket. And then 9 months into it, I get into a surfing accident. And it was my first ever surfing lesson, to make things even worse. And so 2 hours in, we're straddling the board and a wave comes out of nowhere. And because I'm straddling the board with the instructor, there's nowhere for me to go. And so I try to hop off. My body gets under the water, but my head doesn't. The wave hits me in the side of the head. It throws me back 20 feet. And from then on, I remember just being dazed, being concussed, but being okay. And I've been concussed before. I've been knocked out before. So I was like, okay, it's just a minor concussion, no big deal. And so that was on a Sunday. Go to work next day. I'm okay, a little bit dazed, but okay. Next day, my symptoms are almost zero. But then when I go back home that day, my roommate's friend is there. And he's like, hey, let's get tacos for Taco Tuesday. And when someone's like really so excited that they overpower your resistance. Mm. And so I gave in. So we went on a car ride and we were going about 45 in a 20-mile-per-hour zone. We hit a storm drain the road. The car bounces up and I feel something split like deep in the back of my head. And so I went from being super active, ADHD like type of person to now I can't do anything. And so I was driving 15 miles to work. And so that didn't work out.
Dan, let me jump in here. So, because I'm interested and I like hearing these stories and also putting myself in the seat of all the beautiful listeners. What does that feel like in that moment of, it's an interesting paradox to what you were just talking about being in the gym, of sort of gaining your power, gaining your strength, gaining this remembrance. And now what's happening is kind of the paradox, the opposite to this. The scale is bending the other way. Now, seemingly in that moment, as these things are starting to occur, a lot of that external power and strength is being taken away. What does it feel like in that moment?
Yeah. And at the time I didn't really know it, but I had stumbled upon something that triggered out a lot of repressed emotions and repressed fears that I did not know existed at the time. But essentially, like for me, it felt like everything was being taken away from me, for one. Everything that I worked so hard for, and just feeling like that was being pulled away, and that like all this work I did was for nothing. The most painful part was I felt like I was trapped in my body.
Thank you for sharing that, Dan, about the story. And that's really what I wanted to hit on there is this. And we're going to get to this today with some of the other questions I want to ask you. But when it comes to pain, a lot of people have this relationship of, I think for most people, they see it as it's very easy to become the victim. It's very easy to be in that moment to be seen as, oh, this is happening to me. There's nothing in this that can help me expand in any way. And it's within that energy in itself that sort of takes us away from the healing. But this is what you're really good at, my friend. And this is sort of where I want to get into now. And I want to ask you about, from that injury, you then went on to rehabilitate yourself. And I'm going to ask more specific questions about that in a second here. But I guess the question that comes up, sort of wrapping up your story, what gave you the motivation to move from the victim, right? Because I think a lot of people stay in that victim mentality of, okay, this is just too much. There's too much going on here. Like I know my beautiful father listens to this podcast a lot and I love him very much, but it's, I see it in myself and I see it in him. It's sometimes very easy for us to stay in that victim because we get attention, right? We get attention, we get love, we get appreciation from the outside world. But what we don't realize is that we don't shift, we don't move, we don't heal. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, Dan, when that happened, what helped you move from the victim into the person that then healed themselves?
I think for me, I just hated that feeling and just feeling like I can't do anything. That just for me, like the feeling of being trapped was the most painful feeling in the world. And it didn't really matter how much attention I got for it, because especially in my family, like it often just led to more criticism. And I had to move back home with my parents, after that incident. And that it's not, I love my parents, but it's not the most emotionally healthy environment. And so for me, it was just being stuck and being trapped in this made things worse. And the only thing I've always wanted in my life was to be free. And so when I felt like I was trapped in that, it was like I felt like I had to fight with everything I had. And so for me, I'd say the refusal to accept my circumstances was really big for me.
I love it. And I think, just if you're listening to this, we all have that inside of us. It's in my opinion, I know Dan agrees with this, it's only a matter of when, not if, we can get to that point of stepping into that potential, stepping into that energy to move through the things that we deserve to move through, and changing the mindset around, this is happening. This is not happening to me. This is happening for me. How can I change that? How can I get to that space? Dan, I want to shift here now, and thank you for sharing your story and that foundation. I want to now ask you some questions about this, right? Ask you some questions about chronic pain, rehabilitation, all these things. And I think a good place to start is, I asked this question to another dear friend of ours that I had on the podcast recently, Miss Deborah Wayne. And this is one of her specialties and also one of yours. And I got her opinion, and I would recommend people go listen to that episode. But I want to get yours now, my friend. What do you think people have wrong about chronic pain?
I think that what they have wrong is that there's this belief that in society in general, that if something's going wrong with your body, you can just get a surgery and fix it. That you can just take medication and drug it out, and that's just going to alleviate all your problems. And I think also the belief, unfortunately, and it saddens me to say this, that the doctors will help you. And unfortunately, the way our system is set up, especially in the US, is that the doctors are very limited with what they can do. And they're not trained to actually go into the root cause and see what's going on with the body. And so the other thing I think is that people don't realize that, their pain, and my belief in that served me as I've practiced and as I help hundreds of people, is that anything that happens within the body can be resolved within the body. And that if you weren't born with it, then it means it happened somewhere along the way. And if we can figure out why that happens, then we can figure out a solution. And what I found is that a lot of times the root cause can be lifestyle, can be sedentary, the way you sit. I found that people who slouch in the chairs are very, very prone to herniations in the lower back. I find that stress is a massive part of it.
Lifestyle.
Yes, lifestyle. And, stress is 95% of it. And stress, what I realized later on, is really emotional distress.
We'll get to that, Dan. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Let me jump in here. We'll get to that soon because I know that's not a big passion of yours that we both sort of lean into.
Yeah.
Let me just add a few things to what you just said because it's so profound, my friend. And you say it so nonchalantly because it's a part of your being, but I want to make sure people hear it deeply. And so two things. One, you could not be more correct about the doctors, and you did hit on it, but I want to make sure people heard it correctly. I wouldn't even say it's the doctors. I would say it's the systems in which the doctors are within, right? It's a lot of beautiful beings go into these systems to help people, much like yourself, but then they reach a wall of, these creations, these systems are not meant, they're sick care in many ways. They're symptom care in many ways. Like you said, they're not there to get to the root. And us as the client, us as the person in pain, we go there for answers, but then we hit that wall and then we wonder what's going on. So we go to the next doctor, but then we forget that there is a theme here. But I also want to make sure people hear, you talked about being born with it. And I would even say that is still healable and manageable. Like we know right now, like for example, we know through epigenetics, the science of epigenetics now, that even if you do have a genetic SNP that is expressing itself, like the ApoE4 gene with Alzheimer's, we know, as you just beautifully outlined, there are many lifestyle practices we can start to modulate that even though we were genetically born with that expression, we can now turn it on and off based off the choices that we make. So it's just so empowering, my friend. Keep it going. What else do you think? I think those were the big ones, but what else comes up around misconceptions around chronic pain?
That chronic pain is something that that's something that needs to be shut off. I noticed that a lot of people don't really seek to understand their pain. And I think, it's hard, honestly. Like when you're in pain, like it can be absolutely miserable. I was in pain for my neck injury. I was in pain for 19 months every single day before I healed it and figured it out. And they don't realize that there are answers in their pain. And a lot of times their pain is their body crying out because it's been neglected for so long. And so, a lot of what I do with people in pain, besides the really like specific work that I have to do to first get them moving and get them functional again, is really just teaching body awareness and teaching basic health principles. Because when people have gone to pain, a lot of times they've neglected their body for a long period of time. And so, I tell people, if lack of awareness caused the pain, then the solution is awareness.
Yes.
And so
communication, we aren't acknowledging that in sort of, again, the mainstream paradigm that pain is a beautiful messenger, right? I call it the pain teacher. I learned about it as the pain teacher. And if we can change that mindset, now it's coming on a boat of knowledge. And like you beautifully said, if we can apply the right kind of awareness, and that might mean reaching out to someone that has that awareness to help you lean into that, right? Someone that uses a specific modality, has the background, has the experience, has the, insert criteria here, then now we can break down that communication. And then it becomes, and this is where I said at the start with you, a remembrance. Oftentimes, this communication that we decipher, it's not the first time that we're deciphering it. And I won't go too spiritual here today, but we know that ancestral healing is a thing, right? And we know that sometimes remembering a solution to our chronic pain, we've done it before, and we can feel that within inside of us. Mm. Let's jump forward, Dan, to another area that I know that you have a lot of knowledge in. I still want to stick into this physical realm, and I know that you implement a lot of tools with people, a lot of effective rehabilitation tools, modalities, practices. Maybe we can talk about 2 or 3. What are your go-to sort of physical rehabilitation tools that you think people can start implementing for their chronic pain adventure?
Physical tools. Okay.
Yeah. So like breath work, for example, is one I would go to.
That's going to be the first one I mentioned.
Read your mind.
Yeah. So breath work is huge. Because, breathing is going to affect your nervous system. And the reason why a lot of people are in pain, and a lot of times the reason people are even ill, is because they're too stressed. And when you become stressed out, then you start breathing more shallow. And the motion of the diaphragm is so important for function in so many ways. It helps pump the lymph, so it helps with detoxing. It helps stimulate the vagus nerve, which is about relaxation and promoting digestion, absorption, nutrients, repairing cells. And so breathing is really one of the most important things that people need to learn how to do. The diaphragm, like people realize, is a muscle, and it can be strengthened. And the more that you can strengthen it and use it, the better your body's going to be, the better your health's going to be, the better even your skin's going to be, the better everything's. And so breathing is one thing that's extremely important, that's neglected. And sometimes it's the simple things. Another thing is a lot of people talk about stretching, and I'm personally not a huge advocate of it. And now stretching does have its place.
Why is that, Dan? Why is that?
Because essentially your body is an adaptive organism, and anything you do will cause your body to adapt. And when you stretch, you're inhibiting the muscle, you're making it weaker. And short term, that's not a big deal. You need range of motion, and if your muscles are really tight, stretching can help it out.
Yeah.
But I've been really big on creating stability and strength in every range of motion.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, like, people don't realize that, the reason they struggle with mobility is that the body doesn't feel safe to move into those ranges of motion.
Yeah.
And so when you create stability and the brain feels safe that the body can handle moving at that range of motion without risk of injury, then the brain will let it happen.
Yeah. So it's a couple of things here, my friend. I want to come back to that stretching piece in a moment, because I think it's profound what you're saying. But again, let me just add into the breathwork piece. For people listening to this chat, and maybe breathwork, any kind of breathwork is new to you, or you've maybe practiced a little bit, I think the first place to begin, and you hit on this, my friend, is to notice what your autonomic breath is throughout the day. Is your autonomic breath into the chest and through your mouth, or is your autonomic breath in through your nose and into the belly? Simply making that seemingly very slight shift from a nervous system perspective, from a stress, anxiousness, parasympathetic versus sympathetic perspective, that is going to shift a lot, because now you're shifting into a rest and digest state rather than a fight and flight state. That, as you said, if we're constantly breathing shallowly up into the higher chest, that is putting us in that hypervigilant state. And most of us, and I think this is the root of most challenges in the world at the moment, most of us are in only that sympathetic state. We're in that hypervigilant fight or flight state all the time. And that's what's causing the reactions. That's what's causing the gut distress. That's what's causing the sleep distress. That's what's causing, you can keep going. But then you implement the body work, which is where I think your work with this, what you just said about the stretching, is very profound. And let me ask you a question that bubbled up as you were talking about stretching. I agree with you. I think the stability and the strength work are far superior, especially from a nervous system lens. But would you differentiate static and dynamic stretching? Like, so for example, I much prefer a dynamic mobility warm up and stretch rather than a static hold. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. And so that's exactly what I'm saying, which is that static stretching over time has actually been shown to decrease performance. Yeah. And my belief is that the body should be in motion all the time. And dynamic stretching is great. It's definitely great for a warm up. Definitely great in general. I do recommend dynamic mobility. I call it mobility and not stretching. So I differentiate it because when most people think of stretching, they think of just holding a pose. And so I'm a big advocate for mobility, but definitely more movement based and a little bit more contraction based generally, but I do use dynamic mobility as well. So absolutely. Yeah.
So thank you for answering that, Dan. And yeah, that's always been my sort of feeling. And, I started my work much like you, it sounds like, my friend, as a personal trainer here in Australia. And when I was doing strictly personal training, that dynamic versus static conversation, you'd see it everywhere in the gym. And I think a lot of people would get a lot more results just if you're listening to this, shifting from that static to dynamic lens. And I like your dynamic mobility as a reframe. And I think where people, it's much like I see this in the nutritional conversation. I think a lot of people get stuck in the camps. They get stuck in the different groups and tribes. And what they inadvertently do in that is that they then overlook what their body is telling them. They overlook how their body is expressing and communicating, much like we were talking about the start of this chat. And they keep doing as in this example, the static holds, but they don't check on how is their body actually performing? How is their body actually recovering from the chronic pain that they're trying to move through? Would you agree with that, my friend?
Yeah. And Tim Grover has a great quote. And he says that chaos is about everyone and everything. Clarity is about you. And so much, in this world, people are looking for outside voices to tell them what to do instead of tuning into themselves. And this is true for the body. This is true for life, where listening to your body, should indicate what the next steps are. What's the best approach for you? Because every body is different and its needs may be slightly different than someone else. And so much has been put into what's the expert saying? What are these people saying? But the person who's getting the most information and knows their body best is you. And so if you can tune into your own awareness and listen to your own body, the solutions will start to come out. And so that's always been my approach. And it's always been about listening to my body. And when with clients, listening to their body rather than just going through a general approach. And so you have to, self-awareness and body awareness is the most crucial thing.
Again, it goes back to the communication, right? So that it's not just pain that communicates through your body. It's everything in general. And if we simply create the space for that communication to be heard, then we can start building that muscle that learns to decipher said communication. I love it. My friend, let's keep it flowing here. And I intentionally wanted to sort of set that physical foundation, talking a little bit about the breath and the nervous system and the muscles and the joints. But with long-time sort of listeners of this podcast, that people have been tuning into these episodes, I think a lot of my audience are used to me speaking about the spiritual, emotional, and energetic side of our sort of recovery journey and our connection into our self-love and the expression of that self-love. So, and I know, Dan, that you are quite a fan of this perspective too, and you speak a lot about this. So let's start going into this. And I guess where I want to start with you is where should people begin? I had a question, for example, a couple of days ago from a beautiful listener about how the physical symptoms that we have, i.e. pain in many cases, can often connect to emotional trauma or energetic trauma or, just stressed trauma. What comes up for you with someone that wants to start connecting physical symptoms to trauma? Where should they begin? What's the first sort of link that you recommend people start this path with?
I think that, the first step is really identifying, and I think it really starts, at least for me, it started with triggers, where I would notice that I would experience these just massive triggers that sometimes would shut my body down for like 3 days. And it'd be just a shell of myself for several days at a time, where just my ability to function and perform with anything was drastically compromised. And so it's really important that you pay attention to your body. And, and for a lot of people, they may not know what it's like to be relaxed, which is why the breath work is so important. So once you clear that stress out, you can see after what things bring you back into stress, what things bring you back into parasympathetic. And in my journey, I learned that my anxiety that was causing my TMJ was actually pulling my neck out of alignment and preventing it from healing. And so I had to solve a lot of the anxiety symptoms before I could even attempt the rehab. And so through that process, I learned for the first time in my life at 24 years old what it was like not to have anxiety when I trained and exercise to reset my nervous system. And then I remember thinking to myself, like, I wish I could just stay here. And then I started noticing all the things that would bring me back into stress, that bring me back into fight or flight, that bring me back into anxiety. And so then I started to be able to notice what those things were. And so that started with the awareness of just realizing how the world was affecting me. And my belief is that, when it comes to trauma, is that if you are not facing in front of, a lion or a tiger or like an immediate danger, your body should not be having a danger response. It's not ideal. Danger responses should only be when you're actually in physical danger. And so when you're experiencing a stress response, when someone says something to you that triggers you, or when you're in social situations, or just when you're doing something that is relatively safe, then I think that's a great start to start asking questions of why these responses are there and what are they protecting you from. And also noticing how that affects your body. Does that make your pain worse? Do you find your pain is worse when you're triggered, when it's worse when you're stressed? And so these are things to really take note of, because I think trauma is a big buzzword now, where people are asking like, oh my God, do I have trauma? And the real answer is it's how do you feel? What's your life experience? Yes. Do you find yourself becoming dysregulated and triggered in situations that are relatively safe and non-threatening? And if the answer is yes, then there's something to explore into, and then you can go into those responses and start learning about yourself and see why they're there.
If you are listening to this and you take anything away from this episode, it's what Dan just said. And there's a lot there, my friend, and I want to break down a couple of points. Thank you for saying that. So it was profound. And I think, so first of all, all of us being in a constant agitated state, we don't know what sort of peaceful and restful and not being in a stress response feels like. That in itself, I just want people to sit with. It goes back to what I was saying before. Most of us, due to the industrial age that we live in and the unconscious nature that most of us move through that life through, we are in this new normal, right? That's a buzzword at the moment, but I would say that new normal, unfortunately, is that chronic agitated stress state. And I go back to an acronym, my friend, that maybe you're probably aware of. It's breaking down the word fear. And I agree with you. I think there is a natural fear response that if there is a lion in front of us or there's a truck, if we're on the road and there's a truck heading towards us, there's going to be a fear response to help us jump out of the way. That's when that flight or fight stress response is very much natural and needed. But often the fear word breaks down into false evidence appearing real, and we could feel fearful, i.e. in a hyper stress response to everything in life, if that is the constant state that we are in, right? We can have fear come up when we're talking to our partner. We can have fear come up when we eat something. We can have fear come up when we are in a specific dynamic with a relationship. But if our nervous system is in that constant stressed out state, then it's going to extend that response into the cosmos, into a space and place we actually don't need it to be in, because our body is so used to that hyper vigilant sort of scenario. So this understanding and using the tools that Dan is outlining, whether it's the breath, whether it's through the stress connection, whether it's understanding what trauma is, I think can really help us step back from this. Do you agree with that, Dan? Does anything else bubble up there?
I think that's a really great summary, and I'm glad you repeated that because it's so true. And the analogy that I often give people is like, let's just say you have someone who had an extremely stressful childhood, whether they grew up in a really bad neighborhood, they had to survive. Let's say their stress level growing up was a 10 out of 10. And then as they get older, things got better. And now they're living at, say, a 7 out of 10 stress level. If you ask that person, are you stressed out? They're going to tell you no. They're going to tell you they feel the best they've ever felt. They're the least stressed they've ever been their entire life. And why is that? It's because their subjective measurement is based on their own experiences. And because they've been through much worse, their perception of where they are now is not stressed.
Yeah.
And so, but a 7 out of 10 stress level is still a high stress level. So they just may have no idea because what they've experienced has always been normal to them. So anything that better than that is an improvement. And so a lot of times the only way we measure, whether we're stressed or not is just based on our own subjective experience and how we feel. and we may not know that we can feel better. And so what's normal for us, we often assume is normal for other people. And a lot of times it's not. And until you really go in and dig in and start, healing and start becoming aware, do you start to realize that that is not the case.
And Dan, let me jump in there. So what I would say to that person too, to help with that subjective understanding of their reality, to test if they are actually feeling the best they ever have, or if it's just a subjective sort of numbing. And I maybe that word's a bit harsh, but sort of a subjective sort of cognitive dissonance. What I would ask that person is, okay, how are you sleeping at night? How is your digestion? How do you react to stress? How are you happy with your body weight composition? How are you with emotional regulation? I think these are all little tests that we can test against that subjective measure or reality that we might find ourselves in, to really see, oh, am I the best I've ever felt? Or is there something that I need to see? Is there something that I need to move beyond? Is there something I need help with? Because that's not a sign of weakness. That's just a sign that now you're starting to listen in a deeper kind of way.
I think those are great points because, there's always metrics that can be improved. But I mean, I also say, subjectively, when I was 24 and had that accident, I thought that I had resolved my anxiety, and it really was the best I'd ever been, metrics wise. But I did not know there was another level. And what I thought was not having anxiety was really just a lower level of anxiety. And so I think that for some people, it could be the best they felt. And I think that sometimes, like when you're at your best, you think like you've done it, like you're good now, like you're out of the tunnel. And so I think that, but there's always more to go, and there's always more you can improve. And the other thing I would say is that one of the biggest tests, the easiest way to test your stress is just by seeing how you breathe. And because when I bring people, I have clients in and ask them, are they stressed? I don't really ask them because I'm going to trust what they say. I ask them to see if they feel like they're stressed. And then from there, I bring them on my table and watch them breathe. And then I'll know what the real truth is. Yeah,
the breath is a big one, my friend. Something bubbled up just then, Dan, and thank you for going back to your story about sort of moving to that anxiousness, but then your incident occurring. And I want to get what your perspective and opinion on this. Something I talk a lot about on the podcast is I speak a lot about the spiritual health, and I want to get to that with you here in a second, but I want to start with this. As an example, I talk a lot about soul contracts, and, in my belief, we do have reincarnation, and we are a spiritual being having human experience. And this soul that lives this human experience sets out a lot of its lessons and its growth before the life begins, so it can help it expand within the life itself. So with all of that understanding, Dan, I'm wondering, how do you feel when you're in this state, you move through your anxiety, you're feeling great, and then this incident came in, this pain teacher, this accident. Why do you feel personally that came in that moment? What do you think it was there to do, even though, in your words, you were still in this sort of heightened state, but it still came in anyway to apparently give you something? What do you feel that lesson was?
I feel the lesson was I was improving, but I was chasing a lot of superficial things that didn't matter, and I was still attached to everything. And so one example of that was, like, at 24, one of my big goals for that year was to have a threesome. That was literally like one of my goals, and I deemed that as like really important. And it was because I was trying to like get all the things that I felt deprived of early in my life because of my anxiety. And so I was so attached to my job. I was so attached to some of my other goals. Yeah, and they're superficial. Like they're cool desires to fulfill, but they don't have any deep meaning. And when I went through that surfing accident and when I broke my neck, suddenly all the things that I thought was important that I wanted to hold on to, I couldn't hold on to my job. The girl I was seeing at the time was having just amazing sex. It was just one of the best experiences I'd had, I had to let go of that. I had to let go of everything that I thought was important, all these external things, to really focus on what was the most important thing, which was me and my health. And through that, I gained more awareness of myself. And, because I would have known about the anxiety I still had, had it not been for the neck. And also there was a part of me that was hoping that something like this would happen, as weird as it sounds, because
it doesn't sound weird at all, my friends.
I knew that I was mentally weak, and that was something that I struggled with. It was that I always felt like I was weak, and I tried to do things to combat it. Like I wrestled in high school. I did some jujitsu, and it was all because I felt mentally weak, and I was looking for something to give me that strength and that security. And I couldn't find it at home, in the environment that I was growing up in. I couldn't find it. And when I went through that, it was the worst thing I'd ever been through, because, this was also like during the time where CTE was coming out with the NFL. So I was having all these concussions, wondering if I was ever going to be able to function normally again, if I was going to have CTE, was going to be severely brain damaged for life, was my personality going to become compromised if this kept happening. And so I dealt with all these deep fears, all this deep stuff. And through that, I learned who I really was, because I tapped into a part of myself that I'd never seen before. And a part of myself that's so innately, insanely powerful, and that really just showed me who I was. And so to be able to go through all of that and to be able to resolve a lot of my anxiety, in the worst time of my life, and to create my own rehab program, and to do my research on the body while having headaches looking at screens, and to be able to successfully heal myself and rehab myself, not even realizing my neck was broken. I didn't realize that till 3 months after that I healed myself. I learned that there was something deeper in me that was very powerful, that was there, and that no matter what happens, I was willing to fight to the end. I was willing to do whatever it took. And so that lesson, learning about that, was the reason I've been able to start a business. It's been the reason I've been able to keep my business afloat, even at times where I was on the brink. It has allowed me to endure a lot of pain and a lot of adversity that I would not have been able to deal with otherwise. And so I've learned that the adversity really is a good thing. It sucks in the moment. It can be absolutely horrible, but once you get through it and you realize what you can handle and what you can survive, it makes the rest of life so much easier. And so in a lot of ways, I'm grateful for what happened. I don't really love the cliche of like, all the worst that happened to me is not the best thing, but I'm grateful for what I learned from that experience.
So Dan, first of all, thank you for sharing that so openly and vulnerably. And as many, just personally from my perspective, many themes, many themes and trends in that experience in your story, my powerful friend, and sort of what I've been through. But I want to extend this to every single beautiful listener listening to this episode, and what Dan just described, and the understanding and the hero's journey, which is a theme that we all have within inside of us. We all have this sort of path that we take of going out to find answers, finding some of those answers in the external, but then meeting a dragon, meeting an event that's caused us to have a dark night of the soul, going inwards and then coming back out. This is not a Dan thing. This is not a Harrison thing. This is an every single person thing. And when we talk about chronic pain, when we talk about moving through the physical, the emotional, the rehabilitation, to me, as you just heard Dan so beautifully sort of describe, this is what gets us through it, in my opinion. This is why, for example, when people talk about having a spiritual awakening, that 99% of people's spiritual awakenings start with a death of a loved one, or a severe injury, or a car crash, or fill in the blank here. It's because it's not coming in to tell us how horrible we are. It's coming in so we can see the things that need to be seen internally and step into our potential, step into what we're actually capable of. And in Dan's story, I'll just add this, and I want to throw back to you, my friend. Mr. Carl Jung, who I quote a lot on this podcast, talks about in our unconscious, the things that we deserve to heal, the things that we deserve to see, the things that we deserve to move through. What will happen is if we don't handle it in the internal space, it'll now start projecting to the external so we can see it that way, right? It is the law of reflection. We see it in the external world, so we then do the inward journey. I'm wondering if this sort of resonates with you, my friend. Is this internal law and this sort of inner reflection, it sounds like it came up a lot within sort of your healing journey, and also now in the work that you do to really rehabilitate and heal people.
Yeah, absolutely. And, a couple of years ago, I started doing my own trauma work, and I wasn't even a spiritual person at the time. And then I ended up encountering the entire world of spirituality and past life regressions and all things that my scientific mind could not comprehend. And I realized is there a concept that I call the mirror, which is that, everything that we see, that we experience is really just a projection of our inner reality. And we see things according to the way we see ourselves. We see people from the way we see ourselves. That's how the way we learn is by comparing things. And so when we watch other people, we're really comparing them to ourselves. And the things that we think about them that sometimes aren't even true are projections of our own reality. And so certainly, the kind of the illusion of life is that it looks like it's an external game, but really it's an internal game, because everything that happens externally is created internally.
Yeah.
And everything you see, even if you're looking at buildings or structures, was conceived in someone's mind, in their nervous system, before it ever became reality. And so in order to really create your world, it has to start inside you and really internalizing your world and deciding what you want. Yeah. And then once you can kind of manifest that and see that vision, then you can go out and create it. And then you have direction. And so most certainly everything starts internal, and everything that happens externally comes from the internal.
Yes.
And then it reflects back.
Let me ask you a question here, Dan. I want to, test something with your knowledge and your understanding. I totally agree. Everything you just said. And the mission of the Cosmic Love Antenna is to support the idea that we are a spiritual being having a human experience. And to tap into that profound healing potential, it's exactly what you just said. We need to go inwards to see the inner game, right? And the inner power, the inner love, the inner energy. But we also have to remember, and this is where the antenna analogy comes in. If we support the inner energy, that's beautiful. And we allow that, we tap into it, we understand it's there, that's beautiful. But we then have to also realize, and this is what I want to get your opinion on, we have to realize that the physical being that we are supports that frequency flowing effectively. So for example, in your scenario, if I have a broken neck, or if I'm physically deformed, then yes, that spiritual potential is still inside of me, but how it's going to express itself to the outer world is not going to be as effective, opposed to if I healed that neck, if I supported my posture, if I supported my muscles, if I started stretching properly, if I started using breath work, now that spiritual loving energy is going to flow more abundantly through the physical being. Do you agree with the need here, my friend, to support the physical to help the spiritual flow?
Yeah, absolutely, because it really is all connected. And it's hard to be your highest spiritual self if your physical body's suffering.
Yeah.
And it's going to be hard to express yourself to the highest level physically if your spiritual is suffering. And I've actually seen this firsthand. My entire life, I was never a great athlete. Despite the fact that I was very active, I was not the most athletic person. And I was even when I became like really into biomechanics and movement, and my movement was crisp and clean, I was never a great athlete. I was an okay athlete. And then a couple of years ago, when I started clearing my own traumas, some unbelievable things started happening. I was training my vertical jump, and in 1 month, my vertical jump increased by 12 inches. My body felt lighter than ever felt before. I felt stronger than I ever felt before. So during the pandemic, I went 6 months without lifting heavy. And then my second workout back, and the only thing I've been doing is trauma work and maybe a little bit of light movement, but nothing crazy because we're all indoors. I bench pressed the most I'd bench pressed in 4 years. And this was my second workout in 6 months. And it didn't feel like I necessarily gained strength, but I felt like I had access to more strength.
Yes.
And
that's the profound piece there, my friend. That's what I want people to hear. And I'm happy that you just, shared that experience with us. I'll just share my story on top of yours, my friend. Again, when I used to personal train people, I saw what you're describing. I saw the sort of physical, logistical understanding of it. Like if this person showed up for X amount of weeks, recovered for X amount of time, they should be able to do X amount of reps, sets, etc. But then every now and then I would see someone that obviously I felt it, right? Obviously had a very deep spiritual practice, and they would go to the end of their physical capability, but then they would almost tap into a second gear and they would tap into something else. And then they would somehow be able to keep going. And I think it's exactly what you're saying, is that we all have access to this deep reservoir. And this is the part I want people to hear. If we support the physical during this, that reservoir can be more effectively tapped into. Would you agree, sir?
100%.
Yeah.
And I do this all the time, especially, you're doing your own work. Sometimes, your body will suppress emotions. It'll lower your frequency. It'll lower your mood. And then I'll go to the gym. I'll do some breathing stuff. I'll maybe do a psoas release and some vagus nerve stimulation. And then the emotions come up and then I process them and then clear them. And suddenly my frequency is much higher. And so
beautiful.
There's a lot to be explored in that, and more than we can talk about on this podcast. But there's just so much to explore. It's really like another world, and until you really can see evidence that exists, it's hard to believe it does. But when you experience it, the effects are unbelievable.
Yeah, I agree, my friend, and that's why I have a whole podcast to talk about these things, because we are truly holistic beings that work across mind, body, and spirit. And once we see that, then suddenly, a normal gym session starts to become a profound spiritual practice if you allow it to be that way. Let me ask you one more question, two more questions here before we close up. I want to quickly, because we're just talking about the sort of spiritual and emotional side, and you just gave us an example of you sort of tapping into those emotions within exercise and releasing them. I'm wondering, I want people to get even more value out of this. What are some other practices? So you've talked about breath work. You've talked about sort of emotional regulation. What are some other practices in your sort of self-care routine do you have that makes this connection between the physical and or the energetic, emotional, and spiritual that you've noticed work really well?
So another thing I do, like first, when I go to the gym, the first thing I do, I have this exercise. It's from a Posture Restoration Institute, but you blow up a balloon, and you do so when you inhale, you cannot pinch the balloon. So you have to keep the air in the balloon without pinching it. And so it requires you to use intra-abdominal pressure to keep the air in the balloon as you go through your inhale and exhale. And so I found that is just an incredible way just to get the nervous system relaxed and back in the parasympathetic. It corrects breathing patterns faster than anything else I've ever tried. And so that really is the first step. And then the psoas release. Other things that I do is really just, I'm always extremely aware of my body and what it's doing. So I'm really big on kinesthetic awareness and being interoceptive, and really sometimes even closing your eyes and going into your body and seeing what's there. And because that will give you a lot of indicators. And so I'm just very aware. And then bioenergetics would be one thing I do sometimes. So sometimes emotions get stuck or they don't clear out easily. And so sometimes I'll yell in my car. Sometimes that can be if my nervous system feels really stuck that day or trapped. Sometimes the best way to get it open is by doing some hardcore strength work. where you have to use all your nervous system to put into that force to get the weights moving. So sometimes high strength training and max strength training is one way that it can open up the nervous system. And so sometimes I do that literally just so I can access the emotions that my body's holding down.
And that's a big one, Dan, just to jump in here, because for men, women too, but let's just speak to men here. For men that have anger regulation challenges, and their go-to is the suppression of that anger, which we know, if you've been listening to this chat, it's probably not a good idea. One way that we can channel that anger is through, I've experienced this, and I'm sure you have too, my friend, the channeling of that anger through that strength training routine, right? Using the powerful nature of anger, which is very energizing and sort of confidence building if we channel it correctly, using that in the strength routine, using that in the gym, using that when you're boxing, using that. I've found that has been very powerful. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep.
And different exercises are good for different emotional expression,
Yes.
and dance can be a good one if you're trying to get more into your sexual energy, more into feeling playful and joyful. That's a good one. Like I said, strength training, boxing, kickboxing. I've been doing a lot of that. That's really good for anger and also for clearing out hatred. That's one that many people don't realize is in their body. And I didn't realize how much that was in my body. But that's a big one too. And so for sure, learning how to clear those out and the different exercises, learning how to express those emotions and let them flow through different exercises. And also, just in general, just doing work to understand your emotions. I think that we experience our emotions, but a lot of times we don't understand what they actually mean. And I learned that basically every emotion in the human experience really just pertains to gain and loss. And so, like, for example, like if we feel shame, it's usually because we fear that expressing a certain part of ourselves or showing ourselves is going to lead to loss. Either it could be the loss of love, could be the loss of safety, could be the loss of security, whatever it is, that's going to lead to loss. Guilt is a fear that something we did is going to lead to loss. So shame is about who we are. Guilt is about what we did. Anger is a protective emotion to prevent loss. We get angry when our boundaries are crossed. We get angry when being inconvenienced. It's because we're trying to protect ourselves or loved ones in order to prevent loss. And then sadness is the acceptance of loss. And so anytime I'm sad, I know it's because I'm accepting that loss is going to happen and that there's nothing I can do to stop it. And that part is sometimes debatable because sometimes we accept things that don't have to be accepted. And so but sometimes it's important to let go of things we can't control. So there's a fine balance there with sadness.
I think I'm happy that you're sharing this perspective because I think, again, I'll speak to men here. This is obviously a female challenge as well, but I can speak from the masculine perspective. I think a lot of men in general fear understanding emotions at large. And they're concerned with the idea that if they do lean into their beautiful, vulnerable, sensitive, emotional side, that they are becoming less of a masculine structure. They are becoming less of a masculine energy. And I want people to realize, I want every single person listening to hear this in their heart space. Every human, whether you are physiologically a male or physiologically a female, has a feminine and masculine side. And if you are in a male embodiment and you are connecting to what Dan is saying here about understanding your emotions deeper, not only does that not make you less of a man, it makes you more of a man, more of a human, and more, in my opinion, of this spiritual being having a human experience. So I want people to hear that. And I want you to know, especially when we're talking about chronic pain, this is one of the biggest obstacles and challenges I've noticed with getting to the healing objective that you deserve. It's understanding that we are all innately energetic, emotional, and sensitive beings. And the quicker that we can understand that, I think the easier life's going to be.
Yeah, for sure. And often with men, like we're very goal-oriented, very objective focused. And so like I noticed like with myself, like a lot of times the reason I would push those emotions down, part of it was the feel less masculine aspect, but also I saw it as a disruption. I saw it as a distraction from what I was trying to do. And so I would I'd push them away so I could focus on what I was trying to focus on. And what I did not realize at the time was that the emotions will actually allow for more creativity and actually allow for more capability.
Yes.
And so, and it is true, like a lot of men are afraid of being emotional. And I think that, we think of like being emotional as like, oh, your emotions are all over the place. And what I realized is that it's not the emotions that cause that. It's the disempowering beliefs that are triggering that emotional response.
The story.
And so, yeah, absolutely. And so the way the brain works, and before I got into trauma, I was a neurology nerd. And so the way the brain works, it's input, interpretation, output. Information comes in, that's the input. Then you interpret that information, and then there's the output. You respond with an emotion or decision or behavior. And so a lot of times when they experience emotions, I think like the emotions is kind of the thing. And so especially, I think for guys, they don't know what to do with this emotion. How's this going to help me accomplish my objective? What's this going to do for me? And what it will do is it allows you to see how you're interpreting life. Because like I said before, if you're experiencing sadness, if something made you feel sad, it's because you're perceiving it as you're losing something. And if you're feeling angry, it's because you feel like it's some sort of threat they have to try to thwart and prevent. And so when you can understand why these emotions exist, and it's important to feel them, but also sometimes not to play into the reality that the emotions are telling you. But when you can go underneath those and understand why you're interpreting that way and why you're having that emotional response, it can lead to immense power, because you can change your thoughts, you can change your story, you can change your beliefs, and you can actually change how you respond to things. And that has been the biggest thing for me, is that I've actually been able to change my relationship with rejection, be able to change my relationship with people, be able to change my relationship with myself, with life, with adversity. And no longer do I experience, a lot of these painful emotions and like sadness and shame and guilt. I mean, I'm still a human, I still experience them, but the things that used to trigger them for no reason, that didn't really, wasn't really a appropriate or effective emotional response to that situation. I no longer have those emotional responses. I can I'm actually more clear-headed.
So what you're saying here, and Dan, what I might have to do is bring you back on for another episode, because I can feel that we can talk about this mental and emotional side of things a lot deeper, and I think people need to hear it. What you're saying about going back to what you first started with, the story that we tell ourselves about the traumatic or a stressful event, really want people to take that away. Right? Because it's often, and I've experienced this, and as you're hearing Dan say, he's experienced it in his journey and the people that he's helped, it's often not the actual stressor itself that causes the long-term suffering or pain. It's the belief system, the thought structures, the story that we've created, either we've created or someone has projected onto us that we're holding onto. And if we've made that choice initially, we can also make that choice to let it go. So I want people to hear that in Dan's beautiful expression here. Dan, before we finish, I have one more question for you that I want to be mindful to get in, but I want to now give you just a quick little moment here. If people have been enjoying your beautiful voice, your story, your mission, your purpose, your passion, what is a way that people can get in touch with you? What is something that you're offering in the world? What comes up when I ask this question?
Yeah. And so you can find me. Instagram is the main thing I'm using right now. Though I'll be honest, I'm not very active on social media right now. I'm building an in-person business. I just moved to San Diego a couple months ago. So that's where a lot of my focus has been. So I haven't been that active on social media, but Instagram, you can find me. It's Dan_reprime. And if you're interested in learning how to reprogram your subconscious mind so that life happens more naturally, that you don't have to force things or have to tell yourself things to try to offset some of these responses you're having. I do offer coaching online for people who want that. So you can message me on Instagram for that. So that's the best way to find me right now.
Love it. Thank you, Dan. What I'll do, as always, if you're listening to this, if you want to get in touch with this beautiful soul, all these details he just said, I'll put in the show notes of your podcast player, and you can go to it, click on the links, and you can reach out to Dan there. Dan, I love you very much, and I'm very grateful and appreciative of you spending this time with me in your car out in nature in San Diego. One final question here before we close up. The intention of the Cosmic Love Antenna, and we've been hitting on it through all the different lenses here today, is to help people connect back into the inner power of self-love so they can express that power and that love out into the cosmos. And I'm wondering, my friend, how do you personally define that love word?
It's a difficult one. I've thought about it. It's love is life. Love is all-encompassing emotion. It's so essential. I think, something I think about a lot is that love really starts with accepting things as they are. Because love is a byproduct of acceptance. And if you don't accept parts of yourself, then you'll never be able to truly love it. So it really, I honestly struggle with this, because, love is protection. I mean, if you watch, you watch like recent events with Will Smith and him slapping Chris Rock, like that was out of love, I think, protection. He's trying to protect his wife. Whether she was in danger or not is debatable, but it was protection. And so really love is security. That's a good word. Love is security, because when you love something, you will make sure it's secure and you'll protect it. And so I believe that love is security, and that is the most vital thing that people are looking for in this world. And that's why when people don't love parts of themselves, we call them insecurities. So that is my answer.
Mm-hmm. I love it, my friend. And thank you for sharing. And a big part of that question is I think we all have different, deeper understandings of that word, and wherever we are at with that love definition is wherever we need to be. So Dan, I love you very much. Thank you for spending time with me today. Beautiful listeners out there in the podcast world, thank you for tuning into this episode with me and Dan. We both love you unconditionally and are wishing you a wonderful morning, evening, and afternoon wherever you are in the world. Until next time here on the Cosmic Love Antenna, I'm wishing you a beautiful and vibrant week. Bye, everyone. All right, beautiful souls. Before I leave you today, I'm excited to share an announcement and a powerful transformation with you. Starting on January 1st, 2023, I'll be launching a 1-year coaching program one-on-one with me. So if you're looking to move through inner child wounds, ancestral healing, spiritual gifts, overcoming religious trauma, or anything else you hear me speaking about on this podcast, then this program is for you. This is your opportunity to spend a year in my frequency to help you expand one-on-one straight into your nuanced, specialized, and individual needs. This is for you if you're ready, if you feel committed, if that heart is pulling you to the change that you deserve. If you feel like this is you, please message me the word, the comments, the statement, 1 year love on my email or on my social channels, and we'll book your free call to feel in and tune in together to see if we're a good fit for this beautiful transformation. Please be aware I'm only bringing on a certain amount of people for this. So if this is you, please take this advantage before I fill up all my spots. I'm excited if this is the pull that you need, and I'm excited to get in touch and honored to take this journey with you. Sending love, sending light, and I'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the Cosmic Love Antenna podcast. We hope you enjoyed. Be sure to follow Harrison on Instagram, Twitter, and Clubhouse at Harrison Ma. That's Harrison, MEAGHER.
Electricast.